3 weeks had passed since the Grand Fleet left Nexus Prime, and the reports coming back made every alien species proud. The Korthans talked about glorious victories against swarm scout groups. The Vextari shared data showing successful tests of their new weapons. Even the careful Luminari seemed confident that their ancient enemy would be defeated quickly. Commander Lisa Hayes sat in the Human Command Center, reading through the official reports with growing worry. She had been Jake's second-in-command for 5 years, and she knew when something felt wrong. The battle reports were too clean, too perfect. Real war was messy and full of mistakes, but these reports read like training exercises. Amy Carter worked, at her station nearby, running her own analysis of the data streams coming from the fleet. Her screens showed communication patterns, signal delays, and response times. What she saw made her stomach feel sick. "Lisa, you need to look at this." Lisa walked over and studied Amy's displays. The younger woman pointed to a series of timestamps. "Look at these communication gaps. Admiral Zixathera's flagship should be sending updates every 6 hours. But see here, and here and here, some of these gaps are 12 hours long." "Maybe they're busy fighting," Lisa suggested, but she didn't believe it herself. "That's what I thought too," Amy said. She pulled up another screen showing fleet positions. "But look at this. 3 days ago, the Vextari battle group was here, advancing toward swarm territory. Yesterday they reported from the same position. They haven't moved at all." Ben Parker joined them, carrying a cup of coffee and looking tired. Human ships had been working around the clock, evacuating civilians from worlds near the fighting. In 3 weeks, they had saved over 2 million people. But Ben felt like they were always one step behind the danger. "Any word from the heroes?" he asked, his voice bitter. The human evacuation fleet hadn't heard directly from the Grand Fleet in over a week. All their information came through official council channels, and those reports were starting to sound like propaganda. "Something's wrong," Amy said quietly. "The communication patterns don't match normal fleet operations. Either they're maintaining perfect radio silence during active combat, which makes no sense, or—" She stopped talking as her screen suddenly lit up with incoming signals. Not the usual scheduled reports, but emergency transmissions. The 3 humans watched in growing horror as broken messages started coming through. The first voice belonged to a Korthan warrior, his usually proud tone replaced by panic. "Nexus Prime, this is Battle Group 7. We are under heavy attack. The swarm, they're not fighting like before. They're learning our tactics in real time. Request immediate." The signal cut to static. More voices followed. "A Vextari battle." Computer spoke in its mechanical tone, but the words were terrifying. "Warning. Swarm adaptation rate exceeds all projections. Enemy vessels converting our energy attacks into their own weapons. Retreat not possible. Repeat. Retreat not." A Zephyrian mind voice screamed across space, carrying pure terror that made all 3 humans grab their heads in pain. "They're in our thoughts. The swarm has found ways to break through our mental shields. We cannot hide from them. We cannot run from them. They know everything we—" Then silence. Lisa activated the emergency communication system, trying to reach Admiral Zixathera directly. After several long minutes, a weak signal came through. The proud Korthan leader's voice was barely a whisper, filled with pain and disbelief. "Nexus Prime, this is Admiral Zixathera. The Grand Fleet is broken. The swarm has evolved beyond our understanding. They turn our own weapons against us. They learn from every attack we make. My fleet of 3,000 ships is now fewer than 200. Jake's voice came through the speakers from his position on the bridge. "Admiral, what are your orders?" "There are no orders left to give," Zixathera replied. "The swarm is coming to finish what we started. They will reach council space within days. I have failed the galaxy." More reports trickled in over the next few hours, each one worse than the last. The Vextari's great battle computers had been turned into swarm processing centers. The Luminaries' peaceful nature made them easy targets for conversion. The proud Zephyrian mind warriors found their own psychic powers used against them. Species that had bragged about their superiority just 3 weeks ago were now extinct or scattered. The Korthan military, built over thousands of years, was gone. The Vextari technology that was supposed to be unbeatable had become the enemy's greatest weapon. The combined might of 11 civilizations had been crushed in less than a month. Amy stared at her screens, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. How is this possible? The Grand Fleet had the best of everything: 15,000 ships, millions of soldiers, weapons that could destroy planets. Ben shook his head grimly. That's exactly why they lost. The swarm fed on all that advanced technology. Every fancy weapon system became a new tool for the enemy. Every tactical computer became part of their network. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what this meant. If the swarm is coming here and the Grand Fleet is gone, then that means the human evacuation fleet is now the largest military force left in Council space. Amy finished quietly. Jake's voice came through the speakers again, this time addressed to all human ships. All commanders, report to emergency stations. As of this moment, Earth Defense Force is taking operational control of all remaining Council military assets. Ben laughed, but there was no humor in it. 3 weeks ago, they wouldn't let us fight because we were too weak. Now we're all that's left. The irony was bitter. Humans had been given evacuation duty because everyone thought their ships and weapons were too primitive for real combat. Their Earth-built vessels used simple kinetic weapons and basic armor plating. Their tactics were straightforward and uncomplicated. Everything about human military doctrine was considered backward by galactic standards. But now those primitive ships and simple weapons were the only things standing between the swarm and the complete destruction of civilized space. Amy pulled up a tactical display showing swarm movement patterns. They're heading for Earth. The signals we're picking up suggest they've identified humanity as the remaining threat that needs to be eliminated. Threat? Ben asked. They think we're a threat? Lisa studied the display. The swarm wasn't just advancing randomly. They were moving with purpose, following intelligence that told them exactly where to strike next. They're right to be worried. We're the only species left that hasn't been tested by their adaptation systems. Jake appeared in the command center, having rushed down from the bridge. His face was pale but determined. I just received new orders from Earth. Admiral Kate Sullivan is coming with reinforcements, but it'll take her 2 weeks to get here. Until then, we're on our own. How many ships do we have? Lisa asked. Counting the evacuation fleet and the survivors from other species. Maybe 800 vessels total. Most of them are transport ships and light escorts. Amy looked up from her calculations. The swarm force heading this way has been estimated at over 50,000 bioships. The command center fell quiet. Everyone understood the math. 800 ships, most of them designed for rescue operations, against an enemy that had just destroyed the greatest military force in galactic history. It should have been impossible. It should have been hopeless. But as Jake looked around at his officers, he saw something in their eyes that the aliens had missed. Humans didn't know how to give up. Even when the odds were impossible, even when logic said they should run, humans had a tendency to stand and fight anyway. Well, Jake said finally, I guess we're about to find out if being underestimated is an advantage. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the corner of the massive conference room aboard Nexus Prime, watching 12 different alien species argue about war. His hand stayed behind his back as he listened to the Korthans growl about honor and the Vextari speak in their mechanical voices about superior technology. Nobody looked at him or the other humans in the room. They never did. Lieutenant Amy Carter shifted beside him, her tablet showing data that none of the aliens wanted to see. She had spent weeks studying the enemy that was coming. But every time she tried to speak, someone would cut her off or simply ignore her completely. Commander Ben Parker stood on Jake's other side, his jaw tight with frustration. All three humans wore simple blue uniforms that looked plain next to the glowing armor and flowing robes of their alien allies. The emergency session had been going on for 4 hours now. The Devourer swarm had returned after being gone for 1,000 years, and they had already destroyed 3 colonies. The first had been a Korthan military base with 50,000 soldiers. The second was a Vextari research station that supposedly had the best defenses in the galaxy. The third was a civilian world with 2 million people, all gone in less than a week. Admiral Zix Thara, the leader of the Korthan military, slammed his clawed fist on the metal table. His gray skin looked almost black in the harsh lights, and his yellow eyes burned with anger. "The swarm thinks they can return and find us weak," he growled in his deep voice. "They are wrong. We have grown, strong in their absence. Our weapons are better. Our ships are faster, our warriors are braver." The Vextari representative, a tall being made of what looked like living metal, spoke next. Its voice came from speakers in its chest because it had no mouth. "Affirmative. Vextari battle systems have improved by 400% since last. Swarm contact, probability of victory, 93.7%. Jake wanted to laugh, but he kept his face blank. These aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Amy had shown him the reports from the destroyed colonies. The swarm wasn't the same enemy that had been driven away 1,000 years ago. They had changed, evolved, become something new and terrible. A Zephyrian with purple skin and glowing white eyes floated above the table, using its mind powers to stay in the air. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from inside everyone's head. The psychic echoes from the destroyed worlds tell a different story. The swarm has learned. They adapt now in ways they could not before. "Impossible," Admiral Zixithara snarled. "No enemy can adapt fast enough to counter Korthan battle fury and Vextari technology working together." Jake finally stepped forward. The room went quiet, but not because they respected him. They were annoyed that a human dared to interrupt. "Admiral, if I may." "You may not," the Korthan leader cut him off. "Humans will handle evacuation duties. Real warriors will fight the real war." Ben Parker's hands became fists, but Jake put a hand on his arm to stop him. This was nothing new. For 50 years, ever since Earth had joined the Galactic Council, humans had been treated like the weak little brothers of the family. They got the safe jobs, the easy missions, the tasks that nobody else wanted to do. Amy tried again, holding up her tablet. "Sir, the data from the attacks shows nothing useful," the Vextari interrupted. "Human analysis systems are primitive, cannot process advanced combat data correctly." The Zephyrian looked down at Amy with something that might have been pity. "Your people think in straight lines, child. War is more complex than human minds. Can understand." Jake felt his face get hot, but he kept his voice calm. "We're offering to help. Earth fleet has 200 ships ready to fight." This time several aliens made sounds that Jake knew were laughter. The Korthans growled with amusement. The Vextari made mechanical clicking noises. Even the peaceful Luminari, who usually stayed quiet, whispered to each other in their musical language. 200 Earthships, Admiral Zixithara repeated slowly, as if the words tasted bad. "Against an enemy that devours worlds. Your largest ship has what, 50 weapons? My smallest battleship has 300. It's not about the number of weapons," Jake said. "It's about how you use them." More alien laughter filled the room. The Korthan admiral stood up, his massive frame making Jake look small. "Human, your species joined the council because you needed protection. You have never won a real war. You have never faced a true enemy. The swarm will eat your little ships like snacks." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, but the decision had already been made. The Grand Fleet would be formed from the best ships and warriors of 11 species. Humans would get evacuation duty, moving civilians away from the fighting. It was important work, the aliens said, but everyone knew it was just a way to keep the weakest species out of the way. Amy showed Jake the final numbers as they walked back to their quarters. The Grand Fleet would have 15,000 ships. The Korthans were sending their entire military. The Vextari were bringing their newest battle computers. The Zephyrians promised their best mind warriors. Every species was contributing their finest, except humans. Humans got to run away. "They're making a mistake," Amy said quietly when they were alone. "The swarm isn't fighting like they did before. They're learning from every battle, adapting to every weapon they face. These aliens are walking into a trap." Ben nodded angrily. "And when it goes bad, guess who they'll blame?" Jake stopped walking and looked out through a window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the swarm was coming. Somewhere out there, the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen was getting ready to meet them. And somewhere out there, Jake had the feeling that everything was about to go very, very wrong. Let them have their glorious battle, he said finally. We'll do our job. We'll save who we can save. But even as he said it, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that saving refugees might not be enough. The aliens thought humans were weak, good only for running away. Maybe they were right. Maybe when the real fighting started, humanity would prove just how useless they really were. Or maybe, Jake thought as he watched a Corthan battleship fly past the window, the aliens were about to learn something new about what it meant to be human. Admiral Kate Sullivan's flagship dropped out of hyperspace near Nexus Prime exactly 14 days after the Grand Fleet's destruction. Her arrival brought desperately needed reinforcements, but also terrible news from Earth. Long-range sensors had confirmed what everyone feared. The swarm was heading directly for humanity's home system. Jake met Kate in the main docking bay, surprised by how calm she looked despite the circumstances. The Admiral was a small woman with gray hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She had commanded Earth's defenses for over 20 years, but she had never faced anything like this. Captain Morrison, she said, shaking, his hand firmly. I've read your reports. 800 ships against 50,000. Most commanders would have already started running. Where would we run to, Admiral? Jake replied. The swarm has already proven they can track and destroy entire fleets. At least here we can control the battlefield. Kate nodded approvingly. My thoughts exactly. I brought another 400 ships from Earth, plus some interesting new toys our engineers have been working on. But first I want to understand why we're still alive when the galaxy's best military forces are gone. They walked through the station's corridors, passing groups of survivors from a dozen different species. Corthan sat quietly, their warrior, pride broken by defeat. Vextari refugees moved like lost children, their certainty in technology shattered. Zephyrians huddled together, afraid to use their mind powers after what the swarm had done to them. In contrast, the human sections of the station buzzed with activity. Engineers worked on weapon modifications, pilots studied tactical displays, medical teams prepared for casualties. Despite facing impossible odds, the humans acted like they expected to win. Amy and Ben joined them in the command center, where Lieutenant Danny Brooks was explaining his latest project to a group of alien engineers. The young man had taken apart a Vextari shield generator and somehow combined it with Corthan armor plating and human control systems. The key is redundancy, Danny explained, his hands moving quickly as he worked. Alien tech tries to be perfect, which makes it predictable. But human systems are designed to keep working even when half the components fail. We build in backups for our backups. A surviving Vextari engineer watched the demonstration with what might have been amazement. This modification should not function correctly. The technologies are incompatible. That's the point, Danny grinned. The swarm adapts by analyzing how systems work. If our systems work in ways that don't make sense, it takes them longer to figure out how to counter them. Kate studied the hybrid shield system with interest. How much longer? In simulations, about 3 times as long, Amy answered, pulling up data on her tablet. The swarm's adaptation process assumes logical system architecture. When they encounter something that works but shouldn't, their analysis algorithms get confused. Ben pointed to another display showing fighter formations. Captain Steve Turner has been working on the same principle with our attack patterns. Instead of the organized formations that aliens prefer, we're using what he calls controlled chaos. On the screen, human fighters moved in patterns that looked random, but served specific tactical purposes. They changed direction unpredictably, used different weapons in unexpected combinations, and sometimes did things that seemed to serve no purpose at all, except to confuse the enemy. The aliens think we're crazy, Ben continued. But crazy is exactly what we need against an enemy that learns from logical behavior. Kate watched the tactical display with growing understanding. You're not trying to fight the swarm the way everyone else did. You're trying to be so unpredictable that they can't adapt fast enough. Exactly, Jake said. Dr. Rachel Goldman has been studying the swarm samples we recovered from destroyed ships. She discovered something interesting about their adaptation process. Dr. Goldman appeared on the main screen from her research lab, looking tired but excited. "Admiral, the swarm's ability to learn and adapt is incredible, but it has a critical weakness. They need time to process and analyze new information. The more complex the system, the longer it takes." "How long?" Kate asked. "For advanced Vextari technology, about 6 minutes. For Corthan weapons, roughly 8 minutes. But for basic human systems, sometimes over 20 minutes. Our primitive technology is actually harder for them to understand because it's so straightforward." Kate smiled grimly. "So our weakness becomes our strength." "There's more," Rachel continued. "The swarm's collective intelligence starts to break down when it tries to process too many different adaptation patterns simultaneously. If we can hit them with enough different tactics at the same time, we might be able to overload their systems." Amy pulled up battle projections on her screen. "We've been developing a strategy we call maximum chaos. Instead of focusing our attacks like traditional military doctrine suggests, we spread them out. Every ship uses different weapons, different tactics, different timing. It goes against everything they teach in Military Academy," Ben admitted. "But everything they teach in Military Academy just got the Grand Fleet destroyed." Kate studied the tactical plans with growing approval. The human strategy wasn't elegant or sophisticated. It was messy, complicated, and full of redundant systems that seemed wasteful by galactic standards. But it was also completely unlike anything the swarm had faced before. "What about our alien allies?" Kate asked, gesturing toward the refugee camps. "Some of them still have ships and weapons." "That's been challenging," Jake admitted. "Most of them want to fight the way they always have, using their traditional tactics and weapons. It's hard to convince a proud Corthan warrior to abandon his honor code and fight dirty." Major Tony Rodriguez spoke up from his position near the tactical displays. "I've been working with the survivors who are willing to adapt. We're teaching them human-style boarding tactics, guerrilla warfare, and what we call spite fighting." "Spite? Fighting?" Kate raised an eyebrow. Tony grinned. "Fighting not because you expect to win, but because you refuse to lose without making the enemy pay for every inch. It's very human and very effective against an enemy that expects logical behavior." Commander Elena Vasquez joined the group, carrying reports from the outer sensor stations. "Admiral, we're getting our first real-time intelligence on swarm movement patterns. They're not advancing like a traditional military force. They're spreading out, testing our defenses, trying to understand what we're capable of." "Good," Kate said firmly. "Let them study us. The more time they spend trying to figure out our capabilities, the more time we have to prepare surprises." Jake looked around the command center at his officers and allies. 3 weeks ago, they had been the galaxy's afterthought, too weak and primitive to fight in a real war. Now they were the last hope for civilized space. "There's something else," Amy said quietly. "The swarm isn't just coming to destroy us. Based on their movement patterns and the intelligence we've gathered, I think they're coming because they see us as the one species they don't understand yet." Kate considered this. "You mean they're curious about us?" "More than curious," Amy replied. "I think they're worried. Every other species they've faced fought predictably, using advanced systems that could be analyzed and countered. But humans fight differently. We use tactics that don't make sense, weapons that shouldn't work, and strategies that seem designed to fail but somehow succeed anyway." Ben nodded slowly. "So they're coming to Earth not just to finish the war, but to figure out how we work, before we become a bigger problem." "Then let's make sure we're an even bigger problem than they expect," Kate said with determination. "How long until they reach our territory?" "Based on current speed and trajectory, about 72 hours, Elena reported. Kate looked around the room at the faces of her officers, seeing determination mixed with fear, but no sign of surrender. "Then we have 72 hours to show the galaxy that being underestimated is the best advantage of all." The Battle of Kepler Station began at exactly 1400 hours on a Tuesday, when Captain Rick Patterson's mixed fleet dropped out of hyperspace and found themselves face-to-face with 3,000 swarm bioships. The enemy vessels looked like living nightmares, all twisted metal and organic curves that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Rick stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his tactical display showed impossible odds. He had 200 ships under his command, a mix of human vessels and the few alien survivors who had been willing to adapt to human tactics. Against them came an enemy force that had already destroyed civilizations far more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. "All ships, this is Patterson," he spoke into his communicator, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "Remember the plan. Nothing fancy, nothing predictable. Fight like humans, not like textbook warriors." The swarm moved first, their bioships flowing forward in patterns that seemed both organic and perfectly coordinated. They had learned from their victories against the Grand Fleet, expecting to face energy weapons, sophisticated defense systems, and the kind of honorable combat tactics that alien species preferred. Instead, they met something completely different. Commander Julie Martinez led the first attack wave, her fighter squadron armed with what the aliens called primitive kinetic weapons. No energy beams, no plasma cannons, no sophisticated targeting systems. Just good old-fashioned bullets, missiles, and explosively launched projectiles that had been used by humans for centuries. The swarm bioships moved to counter the attack, their adaptive systems analyzing incoming fire and preparing appropriate defenses. But there was nothing to analyze. The human weapons were so basic that the swarm's advanced adaptation protocols couldn't find enough data to work with. Julie's fighters tore through the swarm's outer formations, their simple weapons punching holes in bioarmor that had been designed to absorb and redirect energy attacks. "Target practice, people," Julie called to her pilots. "These things don't know how to handle old-school firepower." The swarm tried to adapt, growing thicker armor and developing kinetic dampeners. But before their adaptation could complete, Major Tony Rodriguez's boarding parties struck from another direction entirely. While alien species used sophisticated combat suits and energy weapons for ship-to-ship fighting, Tony's Marines stormed, swarm vessels with equipment that would have looked familiar to soldiers from Earth's ancient wars. Shotguns, flamethrowers, hand grenades, and simple explosive charges that required no complex targeting systems or advanced algorithms to operate. The swarm's bioships tried to analyze these primitive weapons, but their collective intelligence kept getting confused by the sheer simplicity of human equipment. How do you counter a weapon that's just a tube that throws metal balls really fast? How do you adapt to explosives that work by making things blow up? "Boarding successful on Bioship 7, Tony reported as his Marines fought their way through organic corridors that seemed to writhe around them. Enemy adaptation systems can't figure out how to counter shotgun blasts to the face. But the humans weren't finished with their surprises. Commander Elena Vasquez launched the next phase of their chaotic strategy, suicide bombing drones that weren't actually sophisticated AI units, but simple remote-controlled vehicles packed with explosives. The swarm's defense systems scanned the approaching drones, looking for complex programming to analyze and counter. Instead, they found basic remote control signals and simple timer mechanisms. By the time they realized these weren't advanced weapons but crude bombs, the explosions were already tearing through their formations. Primitive warfare at its finest, Elena muttered as she manually guided another drone into a cluster of bioships. Sometimes the old ways really are the best ways. The surviving alien commanders watched from their own ships in amazement. Admiral Zixithara, his once proud Corthan battleship now following human tactical orders, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "They're winning," he said to his bridge crew, his voice filled with disbelief. "The humans are actually winning against an enemy that destroyed our entire civilization." Lieutenant Colonel Frank Miller demonstrated the next human advantage during a ground assault on a swarm-occupied asteroid base. Instead of the coordinated, honor-bound attacks that Corthan warriors preferred, his forces used guerrilla warfare tactics that hadn't been seen in galactic combat for thousands of years. Booby traps in corridors, snipers in unexpected positions, fake retreats that led enemies into ambushes, and psychological warfare designed to make the swarm waste time and resources chasing ghosts. Frank's soldiers fought dirty, using every trick that more civilized species had abandoned as beneath their dignity. The swarm's collective intelligence tried to analyze these tactics, but human guerrilla warfare was specifically designed to be unpredictable and adaptive. Every time the enemy thought they understood the pattern, Frank's troops changed their approach completely. The key is staying angry, Frank explained to a group of Zephyrian survivors who were trying to learn human tactics. Don't fight because it's logical or honorable. Fight because you're mad at the universe and you want to make someone pay for it. Dr. Goldman monitored the battle from her research station, tracking how the swarm was responding to human tactics. What she saw both excited and terrified her. The enemy adaptation systems are starting to overload, she reported to Admiral Sullivan. They're trying to counter dozens of different human strategies simultaneously, and their processing power is breaking down. How long before they adapt? Kate asked. That's the beautiful part, Rachel replied, her voice filled with scientific excitement. They might not be able to adapt. Human tactics are so chaotic and contradictory that the swarm's collective intelligence is having what we might call a nervous breakdown. On the battlefield, Captain Steve Turner's fighter squadron was proving this theory correct. His pilots flew in formations that changed every few minutes, using different weapons combinations that made no tactical sense, and sometimes performing maneuvers that served no purpose except to confuse the enemy. Blue Squadron, time for the confusion protocol, Steve announced. Remember, if it makes sense to you, don't do it. If it seems stupid but might work, do it twice. His fighters began performing loops and spirals that wasted fuel and accomplished nothing except making the swarm's tracking systems work overtime, trying to predict their next moves. Meanwhile, they continued attacking with whatever weapons they felt like using at any given moment. The swarm bioships began showing signs of system instability. Their perfect coordination started breaking down as different groups tried to adapt to different human strategies all at once. Some bioships grew armor against kinetic weapons, just as energy weapons struck them. Others prepared for energy attacks, just as explosive charges went off inside their hulls. Rick watched from his command bridge as the impossible began to happen. The swarm, which had destroyed the most advanced military forces in the galaxy, was losing to an enemy they couldn't understand or predict. All ships, press the attack, he ordered. Don't give them time to figure us out. Stay chaotic, stay random, stay human. The battle raged for 6 more hours, with humans throwing everything they had at an enemy that grew more confused with each passing minute. When the dust finally settled, over half the swarm force had been destroyed or disabled, while human losses were surprisingly light. But as Rick studied the tactical displays, he realized this was only the beginning. The main swarm force was still coming, and they would have learned from this battle. The real test would come when they reached Earth itself, and humanity would have to prove that their chaotic tactics could work on a planetary scale. Well, he said to his exhausted crew, at least now we know they can bleed. The final battle began when Earth's long-range sensors detected the main swarm force at the edge of the solar system. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of Luna Base, looking at displays that showed more enemy ships than anyone had ever seen in one place. 2 million bioships moved toward Earth like a living cloud of death, their numbers so vast that they blocked out the stars behind them. Final count, Admiral, Amy reported, her voice steady despite the impossible odds. 2 million swarm vessels against our combined fleet of 1,200 ships. Kate nodded calmly, as if those numbers made perfect sense. Around her, the command center buzzed with activity as officers from a dozen different species worked together under human leadership. It would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, but desperate times had changed everything. Dr. Goldman, are you ready with the final protocol? Kate asked. Rachel's voice came through the speakers from her research lab deep inside the moon. As ready as we'll ever be, Admiral. The chaos generators are online and every ship in the fleet is equipped with the new systems. I just hope our theory is correct. It will work, Jake said from his position at the tactical station. It has to work. The plan they had developed was so insane that no military academy in the galaxy would have approved it. Instead of trying to fight the swarm with superior weapons or tactics, humanity had decided to weaponize their own unpredictability. Every ship in their fleet was now equipped with systems designed to broadcast conflicting signals, use incompatible technologies, and employ tactics that changed randomly every few seconds. Captain Roger Hayes led the suicide charge that would test their theory. His ship, the UES Defiance, was loaded with the most chaotic collection of systems that human engineers had ever assembled. Fextari shield generators that had been wired backwards, Corthan weapons that fired in random directions, and human control systems that made decisions based on dice rolls and coin flips. "Remember, people," Roger announced to his crew as they flew directly toward the center of the swarm formation. "We're not trying to win this fight with skill or courage. We're trying to drive the enemy completely insane." The swarm moved to intercept, their bioships flowing together in the perfect coordination that had destroyed every other fleet they had faced. But as Roger's ship approached, something unprecedented began to happen. The chaos generators activated, filling space with contradictory signals that made no sense to any known form of intelligence. The swarm's collective consciousness tried to analyze what it was seeing, but the data streams were completely nonsensical. Weapons that fired backwards, shields that protected the enemy instead of the user, and tactical decisions that seemed designed to help the swarm instead of humanity. "Phase 1 is working," Rachel reported from her lab. "The swarm's analysis. Systems are showing signs of strain. They're trying to process data that contradicts itself." Lieutenant Sam Cooper's fighter squadron demonstrated the final human advantage as they flew directly into the swarm's main formation. Unlike alien pilots who fought for logical reasons like territory or resources, Sam's pilots fought for something. The swarm couldn't understand pure stubborn defiance. "Listen up, people," Sam called to his squadron as they dove into impossible odds. "We're probably all going to die today, but we're going to make these monsters work for it. Every second we stay alive is another second for the chaos generators to do their job." The human fighters began performing suicidal attacks that made no tactical sense. They rammed swarm bioships instead of using their weapons. They flew in formations that exposed them to enemy fire for no strategic reason. They fought not to win, but simply to spite an enemy they refused to surrender to. The swarm's collective intelligence tried to understand this behavior, but it was completely outside their experience. Every species they had conquered fought logically, retreating when defeat was certain and surrendering when continued resistance was hopeless. But humans seemed determined to keep fighting even when they had no chance of victory. "The enemy adaptation systems are reaching critical overload," Rachel announced, her voice filled with excitement and terror. "They're trying to process thousands of contradictory data streams simultaneously. Their collective consciousness is starting to fragment." On Earth's surface, General Mike Torres coordinated ground defenses that were just as chaotic as the space battle. Instead of logical defensive positions, human forces had set up seemingly random strongpoints that served no apparent strategic purpose. Some fortifications faced the wrong direction. Others were placed in locations that couldn't be defended effectively. But the randomness was the point. The swarm's ground forces tried to analyze human defensive patterns and found only chaos. Every time they thought they understood the human strategy, the defenders would do something completely different that made their previous analysis useless. "Remember," Mike told his commanders, "don't think like soldiers today. Think like humans. Do whatever feels right in the moment, even if it makes no sense strategically." The battle reached its climax when the swarm's main processing nodes began to overload completely. Their collective intelligence, designed to rapidly analyze and counter any threat, found itself trying to understand an enemy that defied all logic and reason. Admiral Sullivan watched from her command center as bioships throughout the swarm formation began showing signs of system failure. Some started attacking each other as their adaptation protocols gave them contradictory orders. Others simply stopped moving as their collective consciousness became paralyzed by too much conflicting information. "The enemy's primary network is collapsing," Amy reported, hardly believing her own words. "They're losing cohesion across their entire force." But the victory came at a terrible cost. Roger Hayes and most of his crew died when their ship finally exploded under the strain of running incompatible systems at maximum chaos levels. Sam Cooper's entire fighter squadron was destroyed, though not before they had caused enough confusion to overload 3 swarm processing nodes. As the day wore on, something unprecedented happened. The swarm, which had never retreated from any battle in recorded history, began to withdraw from Earth's solar system. Their collective intelligence was too damaged to continue fighting, and for the first time in their existence, they encountered an enemy they simply couldn't understand. Jake, stood beside Admiral Sullivan as they watched the swarm bioship slowly pull back toward the edge of the system. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. "For now," Kate replied. "They'll be back eventually, but not for a long time. They need to completely rebuild their collective intelligence before they can risk facing humanity again." Dr. Goldman appeared on the main screen, looking exhausted but triumphant. "The theoretical implications are staggering, Admiral. We've proven that advanced intelligence can be defeated by sufficient chaos and unpredictability. The swarm's own sophistication became their weakness when faced with an enemy too primitive to analyze properly." Over the following weeks, as the galaxy began to rebuild, the other species looked at humanity with new respect and fear. The weak race that had been relegated to evacuation duty had accomplished what the most advanced civilizations could not. They had defeated an enemy that seemed unbeatable. Admiral Zix Thara, his pride as a Korthan warrior forever changed, spoke. For many, when he addressed the rebuilt Galactic Council, "We measured strength by the wrong standards," he admitted. "We thought power came from having the best weapons and the most sophisticated tactics. But humanity has shown us that sometimes the greatest strength comes from refusing to give up, no matter how hopeless things seem." Jake, now promoted to Galactic Defense Coordinator, addressed the Council with simple words that would be remembered for generations. "You thought we were weak because we didn't fight like you do. But human strength was never about having the best technology or the most logical strategies. Human strength comes from being too stubborn to quit and too chaotic to predict." The swarm was gone, at least for now, but their defeat had taught the galaxy an important lesson. Advance didn't always mean better, and sometimes the most powerful weapon against impossible odds was the simple human refusal to accept defeat. As Earth began to heal from the battle and the galaxy worked to rebuild its shattered civilizations, one truth became clear to everyone. They had underestimated humanity at their own peril, and they would never make that mistake again.